Well, first I want to say thanks and welcome everybody for coming. I think these are some really important issues that need to be addressed. And Kirk and I have been talking about this kind of stuff for some time now. And right up front, I'm going to tell you, when I took the office of sheriff, I really didn't have a clue of this kind of problem, this kind of activity. And I had to force myself, literally force myself, to open the books, talk to people, and learn about the Constitution. Sure, when I was growing up, we learned about it in school, but quite frankly, after I left school, I never heard about it again. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. Well, the ones in the back, if you missed what I said, you didn't miss anything. Okay, so really what I'm going to talk about tonight is cause and effect. We've got some issues that I think need to be addressed. In general, I'm going to say some unkind words, but I believe straight, honest, and hard talk is overdue. I want to talk about real quickly usurpation of the federal government, bureaucracy, education, and then I'm going to bring it down to a local level, what impact it's had on Josephine County. Now, if I say anything that's incorrect, I encourage someone to come up to me later and correct me. This is from my research. Okay, we have digressed from a republic form of government to that of administrative rule, whereby we are governed by administrative rules, regulations, and policies rather than by the rule of law. Enter the golden rule. He who has the gold rules. Administrative rules, regulations, and policies have economically crippled our country, reducing her to a blatant dependency upon federal subsidy. Regrettably, and far too often, today's politicians are using our freedoms as a bargaining chip to acquire that federal subsidy. Freedoms are increasingly being regulated out of our daily lives. Fundamental rights guaranteed by our Constitution have been recklessly discarded and manipulated to more appropriately reflect socialism. Albeit repugnant to the 10th Amendment, our federal government is attempting to supplant legitimate law enforcement authority through assimilation. At last count, there were over 30 federal law enforcement agencies. Many have given the power of arrest and carry weapons, such as the USDA, IRS, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, OSHA, BATF, FCC, DEA, and I could go on. Some seek to remove our ability to defend ourselves and our families. Politicians are treated differently, often becoming wealthy while serving in office, and not held to the same standards that we are, i.e. health. Let me see a show of hands, and be honest with me. How many of you knew that some of our early presidents actually had to pay to rent the White House, and when they left office, they had to pay that bill? That surprised the dickens out of me. I had no idea. Wow. But you know, we look at what we've got today. We've got multimillionaires being treated as royalty, making a lot of money, spending millions of dollars on the vacations. Is that right? No. I don't think our government was set up to do that. But guess where we're at? Our national debt is the highest ever, topping at over $16 trillion. We spend more money than what we have, and we just simply print some more. 1 in 6 Americans lives in poverty. At least 23 million Americans are out of work or underemployed. And who is the largest employer in the United States today? The government. Bureaucracy, seemingly over time, usurpation and reconstruction have raised their ugly heads, which really shouldn't come as a surprise. Very characteristic to bureaucracy is a term that's often used called mission creep, wherein an never-ending cycle of expansion occurs, evidenced by the disproportionate number of government employees versus private sector. Our centralized federal government seemingly has taken on a life of its own and has, I strongly believe, usurped and reconstructed our Constitution and the doctrine of our republic form of government. Although Congress has legislative authority to make law, neither the executive or the judicial branches do. Where does it in the Constitution allow executive orders to be enforced as if they were law? Seemingly, with the advent of the NDAA and the Strategic Implementation Plan, our federal government is attempting to cleverly circumvent constitutional protections from the people through the assimilation of federal power by federal power, education or lack thereof. Social engineering, folks. John Adams once said, "Liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among people." We are losing this country through the public apathy, the general ignorance, coupled with self-serving, unscrupulous, agenda-driven politicians and attorneys. Heaven forbid we teach our children about the Constitution or their rights guaranteed by that document, let alone the horrific cost of those that sacrificed their lives. This Constitution I speak of is the same document that made this the most privileged country in the world. First, thanks for letting me vent, and I want to bring us down to a local level. What impact has all of this had on Josephine County? We're finally at the end of the fire season. Hundreds of thousands of acres have been, oh, it just keeps creeping down on me. Wonder why I couldn't hear myself anymore. Where'd I leave off? Thousands of acres have been lost or wasted because of the federal government's failed forest policies. Some of these policies are based on false science to fit specific agendas. According to a sheriff in California, which I saw about a year ago, a federal official jokingly referred to such fires as landscape management. I personally see no humor in that quip when you consider the loss of human life, private property, and the cost of that replacement, cost of fighting the fire, lost revenue, loss of the natural resources and wildlife, and the cost of reforestation. It is reported that the U.S. Forest Service has exhausted their $1 billion budget to fight these fires, making it necessary for them to transfer monies from other priorities, such as recalling the federal funding received for the Secure Rural Schools program, which affects over 20 states. Oregon was to get $4 million. They're calling that back because they let the forest burn. The unintended, or maybe not, consequences have a crippling effect. The impact to our communities, health, safety, and welfare has been devastating. In terms of law enforcement, we laid off over 65% of our employees and subsequently saw an increase in crime, and it crippled our ability to provide a safe community to live in. I have personally seen better law enforcement in some third world countries than what we enjoy here today in Josephine County. That disturbs me. Who shares in the responsibility? Who seemingly benefits handsomely from our current predicament? It's not the wildlife, it's not the people, but rather those that have turned this battle into a multi-million-dollar industry. And at whose expense? Us, the taxpayers. One only needs to follow the money to find out who the culprit is. I would enjoy an opportunity to engage a conversation regarding the importance of maintaining a sheriff's office within your community, but that's for another day, another discussion. The office of sheriff has come under attack in several states within the United States, and it's because the sheriff works for you, the people. The sheriff does not work for the government. And I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, and with that, I'm going to sit down.
So, thank you, Gil. So, next we have the man who started Defend Rural America and got so many people organized and has been so successful in getting things changed. So I want to present to you Kirk MacKenzie.
Can you go ahead and turn on my mic? Can you hear that now? Is that good?
Yeah.
Thank you. Before I get started, I want to thank a few people here because these events like this put a lot of work into them. I want to thank John Underwood and the Oregon Liberty Zones for sponsoring this event. And they put this thing together, and I think probably one of the most professional presentations of the events and preparation that I've seen. The sound systems, the audio, everything is just incredible. Then we also have some supporters, and it's important, these exhibitor tables that we put out here are not just because we want people coming in. It's because one of the themes of Defend Rural America is we have to work together. And the people that have come and work on these exhibitor tables have actually come into the philosophy that organizations and people need to do that. So I'd like to acknowledge Eric Dubin, Citizens for Transparent Government, Lumber Wharton, the Liberators, Tom McCurgan, Oath Keepers, Susan Clark for Campaign for Liberty, and I encourage all of you to take some time before you leave today to make sure you visit each and every one of those tables and organizations. I'd also like to thank my wife, Susan MacKenzie, sitting here in the front, who I've now put through hell for a number of years. The stress of the economic impact of these things, it's not easy. At the end of the event, there are DVDs from some of what we're going to be talking about. A lot of the materials that we're talking about today are actually on the Defend Rural America website or on the DVD, so if you want those, stop off. I'd also recognize that we have one county commissioner here today. If you want to be recognized, please go ahead and stand up. Appreciate the fact that you've come. There we go. That's really very important and very appreciated. If I've missed any commissioners, let me know. But let me just talk about three things is going to be what I'm going to talk about today: problems, causes, and solutions. Now, these are some observations that I've made in the past couple of years since I've become involved in this whole program. I've been involved for more than 25 years in the fight. I was the California State Chair for Ross Perot's United We Stand America, last great uprising. And in the intermediate 25 years, I've spent nothing but a tremendous amount of time studying the world, and I understand it in a way that very few people do. The Rural America part of this started for me a couple of years ago when I had a chance to meet with some people from Siskiyou County and begin to hear their story, and I filmed 43 of them to do a documentary video. And having been born in Pocatello, Idaho, and spent a lot of my fondest memories with my grandmother up at the cabin outside of West Yellowstone and up in Idaho, and spend every summer, my wife and I go to Montana up by Kalispell. It's really feels like home to me to be in rural America, even though I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. So what I heard in these stories has had a profound effect on me, and I decided to go all in and trying to fight back because I believe this is the last chance that we have, and it's the last front. On the water side of this thing, we have this delta smelt issue, and so the San Joaquin Valley, which is considered to be the breadbasket of the world, to update you on this, they've gone from a 100% water allocation to 80% the next year, to 60% the next year, to 40% the next year, 20% water allocation. Now those farmers are still paying for 100%, but they're getting 20%. This year, 303-inch delta smelt got it caught in the pumps, and they turned off the water. 800,000 acre feet flow directly to the ocean without going, whether agriculture or food production is starving. It's a crime, in my opinion. That's 800,000 families are infected. That's irrigation for 200,000 acres of land. It's 20 million tons of grapes, to give you kind of a comparable number. It's thousands of jobs. This was actually on a drive that my wife and I made recently through the San Joaquin Valley. Those are dead orchards there with a sign saying Congress created Dust Bowl. This is an orchard, and those trees are as dry as when you go to the hobby stores. They're completely desiccated. They're just standing there dead on the side of the freeway. And along with that, the water losses have destroyed the orchards, the businesses, the jobs, the property values, and the food production of our nation. In addition is this dam demolition. Now this is a dam up in outside of Polson, Montana. Beautiful. Hydropower is pretty an interesting thing. The proposal in the Klamath River, as you probably are aware, is to destroy 4 hydroelectric dams, which will impact 9 counties, 2 states, and 15,751 square miles, which is equal to the size of 4 states, other states in the Union. It's going to destroy, in the process, the reservoirs, the flooding and drought will return, and energy production for 60,000 homes. The way that this proposal is that the group of so-called stakeholders say, well, we know how to manage this area better than everybody else, and we have a proposal, and we want the federal government to go ahead and give us a charter to manage this area instead of the local government. And the word for this is governance. All of a sudden, people who don't actually live there, these are government agencies in Washington, D.C., Portland, Oregon, special interest groups that don't even live in the area, all of a sudden have control over the resources, the economies of the people in those 9 counties. The people don't matter anymore, and frankly, neither does local government. If this continues, you might as well fire your county governments and city governments because they really are not going to have any impact for you in terms of representing your main interest economy. In Montana, the same thing is going on. That's a map of Montana. The purple area is the western watershed that's basically west of the Continental Divide. The same issue is happening there, except instead of the Kirk tribe, it's the Flathead Indians. They're working on a compact, congressional approval, take away all the senior water rights of the western watershed. And not just in the reservation, but all the streams and tributaries and rivers that feed into the Flathead Reservoir or Flathead Lake. The entire watershed. Going to affect 11 counties. The dam demolition is not unique to these areas. Over 1,000 dams now have been blown up nationwide, and there is a plan, there is an agenda to continue the demolition of dams across the country. This is another effort to take control of the water. If you're not familiar with it, it's the White River Watershed Blueway. Those are the 2 states of Arkansas and Missouri, and look at the size of the area that they're going to basically say they're going to take control of. More than half of those states, or at least Arkansas. I mean, we're talking massive amounts of land. And I want to point out to you, this is not even a state where they consider that federal government owns the land. This is all theoretically private property or state property. Nonetheless, these environmental laws are saying we override all of those interests. I look at agriculture. The bison is going to be released back into the wilderness up in Montana. American Predator Reserve has already purchased 300,000 acres, and they want to have a total of 3 million acres so the buffalo can roam free again. 250 buffalo for 3 million acres. It will destroy communities, farms, ranches, agriculture throughout the entire western part. By the way, that happens to be the area where the Bakken oil fields are. In terms of forests, we have this over-densification due to improper management of the forests. We want forests that look more like this, that are open, where the trees are healthier, they're bigger, they get more sunshine, and there's maybe a lower population of 50 to 100 trees per acre. These are sustainable. That's actually a fire that's occurring in the foreground there. And if you notice, there's not enough fuels for this to hop up into the canopy. It actually just ran along the ground, along the grasses, and died out all by itself, rather than becoming a holocaust. That's what you want. This is what we got. One after the other after the other. They're so strong, they generate their own weather. 200 miles per hour in the recent fire up in Montana. There's one outside of Lake Tahoe. We happened to be in Arizona when the 19th hot shots were basically burned alive due to a forest fire down in Arizona. We see the destruction of properties. We see the absolute incineration of living animals, and we're talking about millions of animals that are being burned alive, including endangered species. And when these fires burn, they burn so hot They literally turn the trees to charcoal. They're just still standing, but they're completely blackened and destroyed. About 30 to 40% of the forest, when you have a fire nowadays, are absolutely incinerated. Just plain incinerated. When the forests go and the rains come, you end up having horrific mudslides that cause damage to properties and habitat. Recent flooding in Colorado. Here's an article that states that a good chunk of the reason for that flooding is because there's no longer any of this mitigation. The forests have burned up, and these forest fires now allowing the water to run and create the flooding conditions. It says here, even in an article, one factor has made the flooding considerably worse, the wildfires that have stricken the forest in the region in the past few years. The mud also goes sliding into our water systems, into our creeks, our streams, our rivers, including our rivers, which is a massive violation of the Clean Water Act. And of course, the smoke. Unfortunately, when we go up to Montana, almost every year we're going through forest fire after forest fire after forest fire when we drive. This year we've had them in Tahoe, we've had them in Montana, we've had them in Idaho, we've had them in Oregon. The West is really burning up. And the air quality is far worse than anything that man produces. And these are the 2.5 micron carbon kinds of elements that get in your lungs and stay there and don't move. Massive violation of the Clean Air Act. And the overdensification of trees takes up water. In California, it's estimated that the water loss being sucked up to those overdense trees is between 1 to 2 million acre feet. 1 to 2 million acre feet is 2 mammoth reservoirs full of water. Compare that to the fact that we have 800,000 acre feet that are being flowed to the ocean to feed the little fingerlings. And what you find out is there's more than enough water to do agriculture and take care of the delta smelt if the forests were properly managed. And for those of you who are here in ranching and farming or agriculture here, take note. Because forest management turns out to be extremely important to you too. Recreation. No public access. When we have these listings and these forests are closed, say for the spotted owl, they're basically shutting them down. Public lands, national parks, World Heritage Sites, wilderness areas, wetlands, monuments, national grasslands, you name it. They basically, no hunting, no hiking, no fishing, no off-roading, no pack mules, nothing. Energy. Coal is the main energy source for the United States, about 40%. Our proven coal reserves are 486 billion short tons. Nonetheless, under the Obama administration, the coal industry had met the standards that had been established, and they had years to do it, and they had met it. He changed the standards dramatically, gave them 9 months to comply. Impossible. We have now major coal production facilities being shut down. Oil, we have proven reserves of 1.442 trillion barrels of oil. Those are being shut down because of lizards, buffalo, bugs, and grass. We have natural gas, 2.744 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas. They're also being shut down. We have hydropower, which is the cleanest, most renewable, cheapest power that we have, very dependable power, being destroyed. And we have nuclear facilities. 40% of the nation's nuclear uranium is in a place called Northern Strip in Arizona. That's being closed through dangerous species listing. We have in its place solar. Now, here's a picture of a solar farm. It's expensive, it's inefficient, it uses 100 times more land to produce the same amount of energy as a hydropower dam would produce, space consuming. And tell me that this doesn't impact open space, watersheds and wetlands, habitat, or even those bugs, lizards, and grass. Obviously it has a huge impact. We're also being told that the future was wind farms. This is actually a picture in Tehachapi, California. I mean, how can a society say we don't want you to have freeway signs because they pollute our view, and then say this is the solution to our energy requirements by taking the places that are generally very open space on the hillsides and put energy up like this that's just uglier than hell? It kills eagles, which is a fact that they don't want you to know. And of course, it impacts open space. We take a look at mining. There's a suction dredge mining. It's not a big thing like we used to think a suction dredge mining was. It's a relatively benign activity. Nonetheless, they want to outlaw that and basically take away people's mining rights. The end result of what I see, and not just here in Oregon, but across the nation, is no humans, no human activities, and no human improvements. There's an attack on the prosperity of our nation. Our prosperity, ultimately, everything in this room, either comes from the ground, from the animals, or the plants on the ground, or from the water. That's it. You know, if you took away mining, take away all the steel, the nails, the screws, your chairs, you'd be sitting on the floor, no glasses, no cameras, take away agriculture. And yet this is what's being attacked across the board. There is an agenda, and it's really important that you understand that your isolated fight is not just because you have a unique situation. There is a top-down driven agenda. We are in a crisis. Our health is being attacked. We have reduced air quality, reduced water quality, reduced food quality. If we don't produce our food here and begin to produce, take more of it in from Mexico or other third world countries where they don't have the safety standards that we do. And we have, as Gil has properly said, more stress, more health problems, more spousal, child, and elderly abuse. I think the number that I heard was 15 times increase here in your county. Our safety is under attack. We have more property damage, more drug cartels and drug production. We have more substance abuse and more crime, at the same time that we have reduced firefighting ability. In terms of our welfare, we have fewer jobs, closing businesses, declining county budgets and services. 30% of the nation's counties are about to go under. We have less and more expensive energy. We have had less access to and use of our natural resources. And we have fewer children that are actually staying in these counties. I suspect Josephine is similar to Siskiyou County, and the children are basically there's no place to stay because there's no jobs. They leave. Instead, we have more welfare, funded by basically money printed out of thin air, and more dependence. Our environment, we have increased forest densification and forest fires, and the thing I'm going to talk about a little further is desertification, land turning to deserts. While we have less forests, less incineration, we have loss of forest, loss of the animals' habitat, water quality, air quality, and fish hatcheries. Recreation is under assault. So for the first time, the people in San Francisco Bay who are very liberal socially are beginning to wake up because all of a sudden Yosemite is being shut down. They didn't care about your farms and your ranches and your timber and your mining rights. But now they can't go hiking, walking, fishing, enjoying it when they know that they are stewards of the land, and all of a sudden they're being declined access. It's beginning to resonate on both sides of the aisle. And less fishing, hunting, hiking, camping, swimming, off-roading. This is a fire that my wife and I witnessed as we came back from Arizona to California. This is part of the crisis that we see, these forest fires, and this reduced access to the enjoyment of these. We have two visions going forward for the future of our country, ours and theirs. In ours, we believe in the American dream, that everybody has a home. In theirs, they believe in destruction. In our view, we have a constitution, a government that's formed of, by, and for the people. In their position, that's old hat. That's out of date. That's been replaced. We believe in things like constituents because we want representation. They believe in stakeholders, a word that they've invented out of thin air to give credibility to people who don't live in your area to somehow have some stake in your area and therefore some ability to control it. We believe in free will. They believe in central planning. We believe in government. They believe in governance. We believe in sovereignty, they believe in independence. And we believe in security, and they believe in disarmament. We're losing. We're losing this battle, and rural America is failing as a result. In fact, rural America is being conquered. The primary weapon that's being used is, I'll call it neo-environmentalism. Now, the reason I'm calling it is we make a grave mistake when we say those environmentalists. Because when you say that, what you've said is two things. They have the white hats, they're the good folks, and we're not environmentalists, we have the black hats. Our culture believes that we're supposed to be good stewards of the land, and I bet you most of the people in this room, you are truly environmentalists. Yep. Stop calling them environmentalists and labeling yourself as the bad guys. We're losing the PR campaign. They are neo-environmentalists. Environmentalists, we on both sides of the aisle can come together. Neo-environmentalism is a political movement that's just been cloaked in green. In fact, one of the founders of one of the major Greenpeace, I believe it was, calls them watermelon. Green on the outside and red on the inside. What we have is an issue of environmentalists versus neo-environmentalists. It is the new Civil War. Neo-environmentalists are domestic terrorists, and let's not make a mistake about that. One of those is the Center for Biological Diversity. In a blitzkrieg, which it calls a blitzkrieg, it files for hundreds of endangered species listings, which the government could not respond to. So there's been a secret settlement agreement whereby the government said, well, we will get around to all of them eventually on this time schedule. There are hundreds of them to come, if not thousands, one by one by one. The new weapons of mass destruction, I'm going to talk about these. Legislation, environmental legislation has been taken to the extreme. Scientific fraud, governance and central planning, and agencyism. The Endangered Species Act as portrayed is about the extinction of major species. And I'm old enough, I think everybody in this room, or most of us are old enough to remember when they talked about saving our national symbol, the American bald eagle. We believed it was to save major species from going extinct. In fact, the act had nothing to do with that. It isn't extinction, it's just that they don't think there's enough in this particular pocket. There's tons of coho salmon around the world, but they think there's too few in the Klamath River Basin. But there's millions up Alaska, there's millions over in the Pacific Ocean. They've been successfully planted throughout the United States, including the Great Lakes. But the act talks about pockets. And it's not about species. They're minor mutations, what used to be called subspecies. And they're fooling us. The spotted owl and the barred owl can actually have viable children. That means they're the same species. They are no more different than blondes and brunettes. And the barred owl is doing just fine. The whole idea that that species is going extinct is a complete fraud. And what have they done? They've shut down the forest from all the way from Northern California up to the Canadian border. We think it's about animals, but it actually includes bugs and grasses. We think this act is about restoring the species. But if you read the actual language, it's about habitat restoration. It says nothing about restoring the species, only the habitat. Habitat restoration sounds really good, but what it really means is a land and resources grab. Because what they're trying to do is restore it to a pre-Western civilization condition. You've got to get rid of the ranches, got to get rid of those dams, got to get rid of the hydropower, got to get rid of your jobs, your businesses, your private property rights, your mining. We think it's about scientific measurements, but the Enabling Act talks about best available science. So what do they use? They use proxy data. They're not actually measuring things. They probably don't go out there and count these things. They estimate, and they use substitute data, simulations from the computer, satellite images they look at. We think they're quantitative targets. When they say there's too few spotted owl, you would think that they say, well, we're down to 3,000. No, they don't get down to any numbers. And you would say that when the act would suggest, well, we have to have 3,000 to have a viable population. Not a single quantitative target. In fact, there's no target for the restoration of the species, only to open up and basically depopulate the land. We think it's about native species and native lands being restored in their native lands. In fact, they're imports. The wolf that are coming into now Oregon and California came from Canada into Yellowstone. The coho salmon they talk about as being endangered was actually put in the Klamath River back in the 1910s and 20s. They were brought in from Oregon. They're not native to the Klamath River system. And in fact, it's not native lands. Under the current frogs and toads listing they're working on, we were stunned at a hearing to hear the forest representative say, by the way, we're going to declare habitat to be places where they've never existed before. We just think it's good habitat. It has nothing to do with being native. We would think that they would count the land and all the animals in making their determinations. We were stunned at the same hearing when we said, well, don't you already have enough frogs and toads on the monuments, the national parks, and so forth? They don't count those lands. They don't count those. So as soon as they shut something down and declare it to be a monument, a wilderness, or whatever else, it doesn't count anymore as habitat. They want more land. You see what I'm saying? And we would think they would count all animals, but guess what? They don't count the coho salmon produced by the fish hatchery because somehow, well, it's the same species, but they're psychologically different. It is a hostile takeover, but the ultimate objective is the abolition of property and property rights. It is a serial plunderer. One listing after the next after the next. They take one listing, grab a bunch of land. That land no longer counts. Then comes the next species. They want more land, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. The Equal Access to Justice Act. Now that law says that they only are supposed to be able to have access to those funds if they're small plaintiffs. They actually have to prevail in court, and they're limited to $125 an hour. In practice, these are large law firms that are filing these lawsuits. They're getting away, and the government's paying them up to $650 an hour, and they're doing it on the basis of settlements. They don't actually have to prevail and prove their case in court. A process called sue and settle. The settlement agreements are oftentimes secret, and the whole practice is biased to one side. We have people who are on our side that try to get access to EJA funds and they're denied, like Karen Bud Fallon up in Montana or Wyoming. Here is a letter from members of federal working groups. David Vitter, Ranking Member, Committee on Environment and Public Works. John Boozman, Ranking Member, Subcommittee on Water and Wildlife. Jim Inhofe, who I've met, Ranking Member, Subcommittee on Oversight, and Jeff Sessions, Ranking Member, Subcommittee on Clean Air Act, making a big quest so they can get a copy of the settlement agreement because they're being denied access. Even Congress is not even being told what these agreements are. Then we get into scientific fraud. As I've indicated, the spotted owl program failed. They died at the rate of 3.5% a year. They continued to die with the expulsion of humans, didn't make a difference. And they thought, well, the solution is to close off more habitat, because that's the only solution in the Endangered Species Act. And as indicated, spotted owls are not a species. And according to a paper written by Dr. Bob Zyback, he questions the science. He points out the fact that using computer simulations instead of empirical data, there's no correlation between the owl populations and the designated habitat, and the cost to the economies is tens of billions of dollars in economic hardships for what basically amounts to 350 pair of birds. The new listing has frogs and toads in California. This listing is now going to take the war or the shutoffs of the forest over the Sierra Nevada forest. We're talking about 2+ million acres, spans 14 counties and 9 forests, including Yosemite. The primary cause that frogs and toads are dying worldwide, even in wilderness and pristine areas, because of a fungus. It was due to an African frog that's imported to the United States for pregnancy testing.
Oh, jeez.
And some trout plantings is argued. Habitat is not the problem, it's not the solution. Nonetheless, they're moving forward to shut down 2 million acres. And as I mentioned, the revelations, they don't count pristine areas. They feel that this controls private property as well. Native doesn't count, and wilderness and mining business also don't count. The Klamath River dams is another example. The coho is not endangered. The ocean began to warm somewhat, and the coho salmon don't like it, so they moved up to Alaska Gulf. You're not going to find a problem with the populations up there. As soon as the water cooled down, you had records of coho salmon came back to the Klamath River system just this year and last. Nonetheless, they moved forward on destroying those dams, which will destroy a fish hatchery that produces 6 million salmon a year and release 20 million cubic yards of accumulated sediments into the Klamath River system. That is 1 foot deep on a 2-lane road for a distance of 1,600 miles. Here is an actual video of the Condit Dam and the destruction of that dam. You can see all those rivers, just the river systems are being, slush is being released. All the riparian habitat, forget about that. That's what they ended up with afterwards. The destruction of these lakes, destruction of riparian habitat, and the destruction of property values. How would you like to be the owner of those properties with what used to be a waterfront property? Not only has that value of that property gone down, but they're now in violation because that particular angle of dirt sliding into the river potentially, or the water system, is actually a violation now. Drakes Bay Oyster Farm, Dr. Corey Goodman. Now this is a very interesting story to understand because this is Marin County, which is probably the most liberal county in California. And they consider themselves to be a model of environmental agriculture. They call it sustainable agriculture. Nonetheless, the arguments being used to shut down this oyster farm have been peeled back by Dr. Corey Goodman, a member of the Scientific Academy, and a well-respected and relatively prosperous venture capitalist. One after the other of fraudulent abuse of science, and even though he points them out, they continue to go with more. One of the arguments they make for getting rid of this oyster farm, it's 40% of the production of oysters in California, and the area loves these business. They're a beloved family, they're a beloved business to the community, is the oysters produce too much poop.
Oh, jeez.
Now, when is the last time you heard about that? And yet on the East Coast, they're having programs to restore the oysters. Go figure. And the use of proxy data. They claim that this business makes too much noise. One of the examples is they have an oyster sorter, which is a plastic tube with slots of various sizes, and I think it's a 1/4 horsepower or half horsepower electric motor that turns this thing and allows the oysters to drop out according to size. They claim that that sound can be heard 1.5 miles away and therefore disturbs some seals. And in fact, that data is taken from the military concrete mixer, steel drum, mixing gravel. They didn't actually measure this. They also said this boat, the motor makes too much noise. It's about a 10 horsepower putt-putt motor. What they used was data taken on the East Coast of a study of a jet ski boat. There is no empirical data, no actual measurements, just whatever you can come up with to generate a predetermined outcome. And these are the words of Dr. Corey Goodman. In the case of the Delta smelt, which finally reached the court systems, the judge, Oliver Wagner, was so finally angered by testimony from the two scientists that represent the government point of view that he said was false, contradictory, and misleading. An attempt to mislead and to deceive the court into accepting not only was not the best science, it's not science. And then there's this situation. Cattle have been believed and targeted as being destructive to the habitat.
The most massive tsunami, perfect storm is bearing down upon us. Desertification is a fancy word for land that is turning to desert. We have environments where we have months of humidity followed by months of dryness, and that is where desertification is occurring. Generally what you see in green is not desertifying, and what you see in brown is. And these are by far the greatest areas of the earth. About 2/3, I would guess, of the world is desertifying. We know that desertification is caused by livestock, mostly cattle, sheep, and goats, overgrazing the plants, okay, leaving the soil bare and giving off methane. Almost everybody knows this, from Nobel laureates to golf caddies, or was taught it, as I was. Well, I have news for you. We were once just as certain that the world was flat. We were wrong then, and we are wrong again. When I came to the United States, I got a shock to find national parks like this one desertifying as badly as anything in Africa. Clearly, we have never understood what is causing desertification, which has destroyed many civilizations and now threatens us globally. But I have for you a very simple message that offers more hope than you can imagine. This picture is a typical seasonal grassland. It has just come through 4 months of rain, and it's now going into 8 months of dry season. And watch the change as it goes into this long dry season. Now, all of that grass you see above ground has to decay biologically before the next growing season. And if it doesn't, the grassland and the soil begin to die. To prevent that, we have traditionally used fire. But fire also leaves the soil bare, releasing carbon. And worse than that, burning 1 hectare of grassland gives off more and more damaging pollutants than 6,000 cars. We cannot burn it without causing desertification and climate change. What are we going to do? There is only one option. I repeat to you, only one option left to climatologists and scientists, and that is to do the unthinkable and to use livestock, bunched and moving, as a proxy for former herds and predators and mimic nature. There is no other alternative left to mankind. So let's do that. So on this bit of grassland, we'll do it, but just in the foreground. We'll impact it very heavily with cattle to mimic nature, and we've done so, and look at that. All of that grass is now covering the soil as dung, urine, and litter or mulch, as every one of the gardeners amongst you would understand, and that soil is ready to hold, absorb, and hold the rain, to store carbon, and to break down methane. And we did that without using fire to damage the soil, and the plants are free to grow. This is land close to land that we manage in Zimbabwe. It has just come through 4 months of very good rains, it got that year, and it's going into the long dry season. But as you can see, all of that rain, almost all of it, has evaporated from the soil surface. The river is dry despite the rain just having ended, Okay, and we have 150,000 people on almost permanent food aid. Now let's go to our land nearby on the same day with the same rainfall, and look at that. Our river is flowing and healthy and clean, it's fine. The production of grass, shrubs, trees, wildlife, everything is now more productive, and we have virtually no fear of dry years. And we did that by increasing the cattle and goats 400%. Millions of men, women, and children are suffering and dying. And if this continues, we are unlikely to be able to stop the climate changing even after we have eliminated the use of fossil fuels. I believe I've shown you how we can work with nature at very low cost to reverse all this. We are already doing so on about 15 million hectares on 5 continents. I can think of almost nothing that offers more hope for our planet, for your children, and their children, and all of humanity. Thank you.
All these attacks on wolves, these endangered species, you got my mic back on? All these attacks on wolves, on cattle, wolves and predators and, grassland designations as endangered and so forth. They go on and on and on. Completely falsified science. It's interesting in this particular story, that's why I spent a little extra time for you to understand this, is the way that Dr. Alan Savory, got to this position. Is they had this desertification that they were studying in one area in Africa, and they eliminated the people, and nonetheless the desertification continued. And then they went ahead and they eliminated other things, and the desertification continued. And finally they determined the elephants were the problem because the elephants were stamping down and destroying the habitat. They slaughtered 40,000 elephants. Now who would have thought that scientists killed more elephants than poachers? And it's something he bears because he now understands that what he did was criminal. And yet we have people who know this, but they want to do this in the United States. Or the sage grouse. Now this particular listing affects, I think it's something like 11 states. And there's an article in Pick and Shovel magazine indicating that the main threats to sage grouse are not humans or surface disturbances brought about by prospectors, but instead by cheatgrass and wildfires. And the third most detrimental threat is predators, namely ravens, coyotes, and badgers. Nonetheless, this one will be to go out and restore habitat. Finally, the fourth weapon is this agencyism, which really doesn't exist in the Constitution. I find the use of the word agency interesting. For those who are brokers or realtors, that is a very powerful concept in the law. These are agencies we were told are there to protect our interests. In fact, they're not. They're there to control us. And there's no due process. Administrative, not constitutional law. Administrative, not constitutional courts. Decisions by administrators, not jurors. It's a completely parallel system. Unconstitutional. How do we fight back? First is I think we have to acknowledge openly and to ourselves that we are losing. And we will not win if we continue repeating what we've been doing. And yet that's what we do. Cattlemen organizations continue to do what they've been doing for 50, 100 years. Cattlewomen, granges, farm bureaus, all going along the same path, believing the solution is in the federal government, believing and getting in, if we could just get the law changed. If we could go out and wave our flags and signs out in the corner, or do those last minute emails and calls and faxes to our representatives. It ain't working. The people must lead. And they have to get off the bleachers and onto the field. We think of this as like we do a football game. We're going to elect 3 county commissioners and a sheriff, and they're going to take care of everything for us. But guess what? Even if they're the most constitutional and strongest people that there are, the other side is sitting there very well organized, very well funded. They have their phone trees, they have their communication systems, they have their tops-down instructions. Do you think we're going to win? My message to everybody here is you've got to stop thinking of this as a game and those people are going to solve your problems, and you've got to get down on the playing field and you've got to get down there and work with them, side by side. If you have representatives on our boards, you've got to push them. If they're ones that are on your side, you've got to defend them. You've always got to continue to move forward, but you've got to work together as a team on the field. Defend Rural America is an all-volunteer movement. There's no money in this organization. There's not an organization, in fact. It's a complete package. It consists of the education, the strategy, the tactics, the training, and the organizing. It's completely voluntary. Those individuals and groups that decide to become part of this movement step up and decide to do that, like I have done here. It's bottoms up, grassroots, so it's organized by county, because this is my message. We have a lot of people that want to be the national leader or something, this, that, or the other. My message is just focus on your county and take back your county, and we'll let others take back their counties, and pretty soon we'll have constitutional states and we'll have a constitutional country again. It's nonpartisan. This is not an issue of Republican versus Democratic or liberal versus conservative. It's a question of right versus wrong, freedom versus suppression. These are the same issues confronted over 200 years ago and throughout mankind history. We're at a pivot point. It wants Defend Rural America is based on the idea that we've been too much on the defense, and you can't win on the defense. All you can slow down is their offense, but they will continue to beat you. You have to go on the offense, and you have to focus. Current efforts are to take this neo-environmentalism head on, reopen the forest, and start responsible management. The program I call the Constitutional County, and restore local government, that is representative government. I'm going to talk about each of these now. If we don't restore local government, we will have global governance. There's nothing in between. So take on the Endangered Species Act, public education like I've started here tonight. I think more people need to understand what the Endangered Species Act really truly is, not what we think it is. The counties have to engage in this battle. You know, this frogs and toads listing, a few of us fought back and we successfully raised the message to all these 14 counties. But the county boards were slow to move. They're cumbered by, delays, 10 days to get it on the agenda, 10 days to think about it, set up a committee. In the meantime, the clock was ticking. And so a few of us were able to get our organizations to put up a few $1,000s to actually write the commentary that was required to respond to this. That's not a good solution. The counties have to engage, and they have to put your money towards protecting your interests. The issue at hand on the frogs and toads listing is a challenge to defeat this listing, and there's a whole bunch of request specifics here for those who are interested, because now I think you have a frog listing up here in Oregon or other listings requesting extensions, requesting hearings, find the best commentary possible, and to begin to fight back using their rules and regulations. But long term, we have to understand that these listings are going to continue to come, and every county government needs to erect a permanent shield. And what I mean by that is they need to put the money, your tax money, to use to actually defend against these listings that are going to be coming. That means reading the Federal Register daily, finding out what attacks are coming your way, and immediately responding to them and set up a time schedule and plan to defeat them. And I think it means that you hire a guy like Doyle Shanley from Apache County, Arizona, and his company to do it. You want the best possible defense that you can have. But it has to be funded by the county because volunteer effort cannot take this on. Believe me, if you want to go through that listing, there's over 300 quote scientific citations that have to be read and pursued and individually addressed. It is a time-consuming job for somebody that really has to understand what they're doing. The counties don't have to bear the whole burden. So I do propose that these rural counties in certain regional areas, which means in Oregon, the ones that are rural, not Portland, they work together and you could share the costs. So a couple $1,000s a month times $10,000, $20,000 a month would be more than enough to be able to put an effective shielding in place for all of the counties, in my opinion. We will be giving a training course on October 26th, where we're going to get dedicated people who really want to write these commentaries and understand these in detail. It's a 6-hour course that's provided for free to people who qualify, and we'll be doing those twice, once in the Fresno area and once in Sonora, California. Second, we need to reopen the forests, and our plan on this is to exercise our jurisdiction, which I'm going to talk more about. We want 2 resolutions from the Board of Commissioners. 1, we want them to absolutely declare a state of emergency, because that's the situation we're in. Now, I know that Siskiyou is doing this and this movement to separate as a state. We need to honestly, openly, publicly say rural America is in a state of emergency. And number 2, to authorize and direct the sheriff to reopen the roads and the appropriate people to go in and start harvesting those trees once again in a responsible fashion. Start a pilot program, a smaller one that is clearly putting communities at risk, and that's where you start and you make a success of that program and then you expand. All of this under the county authority, and your county has the jurisdiction to defend and the duty to defend the health, safety, and welfare of its people. It could pass these resolutions within a month. Constitutional County has a lot of aspects to it. I'm not going to be going through them all today because that is a presentation in and of its own. But basically it's to affirm and to restore the Constitution. Representative government is one of those constitutional constraints, unalienable rights, jurisdiction. It starts with constitutional education. I'm going to give it very briefly relative to what I'm talking about today. The Constitution is a declaration by we the people. It is not a contract. It is not an agreement. It is nothing the federal government had anything to do with it. We gave birth to this national entity to serve our purposes. It establishes a federation of states. Those are being, states is a word that we now have a different meaning to what it really means. A state is the same as a nation, is the same as a country. We have in these states 50 countries that voluntarily work together through a coordinating body. And that charter, that job description that we gave them, limited what we wanted them to do. It essentially is an organization chart with job descriptions. Article 1, the legislative establishes the powers and the limitations of this central body. And the Bill of Rights affirms those limitations. And Articles 2 and 3 establish an executive and a judicial to enforce and protect what we have asked them to do to protect us and to stay within the limitation. And it is binding. States are sovereign countries, but they're acting like counties. We're acting like we're subordinate. We're acting like somehow we have one country. We don't. We have 50 countries in a coalition. It's a federation of 50 sovereign states. You should not think of this as a nation. It is the United States of America are, not the United States of America is. Capitol Hill is a meeting place for sovereign countries to come together to work things out of common interest within the scope of the authority that we have given them. A good place to start, perhaps, is to rethink the Pledge of Allegiance and let me propose a new one. I pledge allegiance to the flag of these United States and to the republic for which it stands, one federation under God, with liberty and justice for all. I think, and a flag does not have fringe. Let's talk about jurisdiction. I'll start by talking about jurisdiction over public lands. And in this discussion, it's important to separate between different roles. You can own land, you can be the trustee for land, you can have legislative authority over land, and you can have jurisdiction. What do those things all mean? When it comes to public lands, the owner are the people. That's why they're public lands. We, the people, own these lands, not the federal government. The federal government is the trustee. The legislative authority over these lands is defined by the Constitution. And then what the heck is this thing called jurisdiction? It's a word that does not appear in the Constitution. Juris, like jurisprudence, refers to the courts. The courts had to decide where do they have authority. And what they rightfully decided is they only have authority where they have legislative authority. Court authority, jurisdiction, only exists where they have legislative authority. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the U.S. Constitution gives the federal government legislative authority in only two situations. 10 square miles of lands to be ceded by the appropriate states, which we now know as the District of Columbia, and lands purchased from the states with their consent, these are called enclaves, for enumerated purposes. The limitations on the federal government to land ownership or legislative authority are as tight in the binding as any other limitation of the federal government. It is only for the erection, the construction of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. That is the only place they have exclusive legislative authority under this article. And then Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 gives them authority over U.S. possessions, which is Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, and American Samoa. It did not give them authority over public lands, national forests, rivers, waters, navigable or not, monuments, wilderness areas, or your personal property or mining rights. They do not have that authority. And when they don't have that legislative authority, they neither have the court authority. The Supreme Court does not have jurisdiction if they don't have legislative authority. I'm going to call this the federal zone. That is the proper area within which the Constitution allows the federal government to have authority, legislative authority, and jurisdiction, and none other. So we think about it this way. All U.S. lands, that's the federal zone. Washington, D.C., the federal enclaves, which is basically places like now forts, military bases, wherever they purchase land with the consent of the states, possessions and territories. The rest of that falls either in public lands, which belong to we, the people, or to private property belonging to individuals. Federal legislation does not apply to sovereigns, to sovereign states, or to sovereign state lands. Federal purchases of public lands from states for non-enumerated purposes, or from organizations such as the Center for Biological Diversity, or from individuals, are unconstitutional and therefore null and void, even if the states consent. Let me give you some Supreme Court decisions. In the United States, sovereignty resides in the people who act through the organs established by the Constitution. The Congress cannot invoke the sovereign power of the people to override their will, as thus declared. Sovereignty resides in the people. Where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation which would abrogate them. And this decision, where Congress exceeds its authority relative to the states, the departure from the constitutional plan cannot be ratified by the consent of state officials. The constitutional authority of Congress cannot be expanded by the consent of the governmental unit whose domain is thereby known. They can't do it constitutionally, and your states do not have the authority to do it either. Legislation is presumptively territorial and confined to limits over which the law-making power has jurisdiction. Within any state of this union, the preservation of the peace and the protection of person and property are the functions of the state government. The state government, not the federal government. They are not part of the primary duty, at least of the nation. In other words, the federal part. The laws of Congress in respect to those matters do not extend into the territorial limits of the states, but have force only in the District of Columbia and other places that are within the exclusive jurisdiction of the national government. The canon of construction, which teaches that legislation of Congress, unless a contrary intent appears, is meant to apply only within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. In 1962, under President Eisenhower's administration and his direction, a report was released. This is long after the enabling acts for most states, which many people believe we gave away our lands to the federal government. So understand, this is the most recent federal ruling relative to those enabling acts. It categorizes all federal land interests into 5 categories. Category 4 is proprietorial interest only. And what that definition is, the federal government has acquired some right or title to an area in a state, but has not obtained any measure of the state's authority over the area. 95% of that thing we call federal land in the western states, that 2/3 that we call federal, is in Category 4. The states have jurisdiction, not the federal government, including these so-called national forests. Thus, states and counties have jurisdiction over national forests. They have the authority and the duty to defend the health, safety, and welfare of their constituents, and none other. Their job isn't to defend owls. It isn't to defend the federal government. It isn't to defend special interests. This is it. When you take on authority, you take on duty as well. Let's talk about private property. The founding principle of this nation is based upon what does it take to make a free person. Because we'd had a feudal system that didn't work out for the people so well. And our founding fathers determined that a freehold, in other words, the free ownership of land, is required to be a free man. The objective, therefore, was to turn public land into private property. And this was accomplished with land patents. All private property in the United States is connected to a land patent signed by U.S. President. And you have multiple authorities on this, but one I want to recognize in this room is Ron Gibson. And Ron, wherever you are, stand up. He gave an interview, it's available on the website, what an individual he is. It's an honor to know you, Ron. So what are we going back to our model here? The job of the nation was to take those public lands, and as people said, hey, I'll take my 20 acres of meal and I'll make productive use of it, or I'll mine that gold and silver, and they did so for a period of 5 years, was to turn title over of those lands to the individuals. And that went directly from the President of the United States to the individual, not through the state. Here's a sample land patent and some of the key wording. This one's signed by President William McKinley. Know ye, therefore, there is therefore granted unto the said person and to his heirs and assigns forever. Forever means forever. Right, Ron? Granted. The state had nothing to do with that chain of title and has no authority over that. That land is your land. The states ceded their title of the public lands to the federal government. They are not, therefore, in the chain of title. They cannot come back and take away your private property. That grant was perpetual. And furthermore, the federal government ceded all authority over those lands unless it was otherwise stated in the land patent. Therefore, does either the federal government or the state government have the right of eminent domain?
No.
No! It's a complete fraud. And let's recall, the people are the sovereigns. These lands are our lands. So what's holding us back? When I began this program, I had great hope that rural America would be the place that we could be running at 100 miles an hour and begin to get constitutionals back, counties back, and to begin to take control of our country. That hasn't turned out to be that way. Partly because rooms like this don't get filled. That's a problem. And partly because of other reasons, but I'm going to focus on this one. Our view is here we are as the people, in that we send our money, our property taxes, and our votes, and this is how, and the county therefore works for us, and government does two things. It sets policy and enforces that policy. That's not what's happening. And we know this to be government. Here's the reality. Here's the county and the people. Your property taxes now go to your state.
Yep.
They don't go to your county.
Nope.
We have every election cycle in the Bay Area another measure to go ahead and increase property taxes for the kids. It's a fraud.
Yep.
Property taxes are now another form of state tax, right along with income tax and sales tax. And this was acknowledged. I gave this, I didn't have this presentation at this point, but I threw this fact out at a meeting in Prather, California, near Fresno, California. A state board of supervisor from that county stood up and says, Kirk's right. Only 11% of property taxes stay in Fresno County. 89% go to the state of California. But what happens with those monies? Well, part of them come back to the county, which makes the grant writer one of the most important people in your county, because that money comes back with conditions on it. Policy. Well, you can have money if you adopt Common Core education. You can have money if you get rid of all these single-family homes and go to stack and pack housing. You can have money if you get rid of cars and you go to mass transit. You can have money if you enforce these endangered species acts. All the counties now do are enforce policies that are coming from top down.
Yep. Yep.
Regional plans are one form of that. It's such a good deal, this also started with the Fed. The Fed was the first to bypass the states. That's with the alleged 16th Amendment to the Constitution, whereby the federal government says we have to pay a tax to them directly. That's fraudulent, by the way, that's not true, but that's yet another presentation. The money bypasses the states. They also bypass the states with the 17th Amendment by kicking them out of the Senate. They also bypass the states and basically, allegedly, passing the 14th and 15th Amendments at the point of a gun. Your money, your federal income taxes go directly to the Fed. Other people like this, regional governments, their pockets of money. The state says, well, you can have it provided you subordinate your county to a regional planning body.
Yep.
and pre-approve the plans. And by the way, it'll now be a vote of the majority and go along with it, which means that if 2 of your counties decide not to go along with it, but you're the minority, you're going to go along with it anyway, which means your people don't count. Stakeholders, with their sue and settle kind of techniques, and the Service Employee International Union. This is the reality, is your counties, and I don't blame them, by the way, but here's when this decision was made, and I believe it was a result of the Supreme Court. They took your tax money away. Your counties were basically turned into prostitutes. The only way to get money for your county is to go along with the program, and they've done it for so long you don't even realize it's a corrupt system. The word for that is governance. And by the way, we can throw in United Nations right in here, the central bankers and everybody else, because it's a great scheme. Once you have displaced the Republican form of government, hey, anything is fair game. That's why you're not being listened to. Now there's some words for this. For what the state and federal governments are doing is theft. It's blackmail. It's an unconstitutional expansion of authority. And when the counties engage in this, and the county officials do this, and they don't do it willingly or knowingly, but this is what the appropriate words would be, a breach of fiduciary duty. Your representatives are your agents, and agency law is very clear. You can't represent other competing interests. It's a conflict of interest. It's self-dealing. It's negligence. It's an illegal transfer of authority. When you hire a realtor and have a contract, that realtor can't turn that contract over to another realtor. You've hired that realtor to do the job. Governments cannot just take their powers and turn them over to something else. And when the process works to expand the federal government beyond its constitutional authority, and the states engage in this process with them, it's a conspiracy to oppress. And when you understand the monetary system, understand this money is being created out of thin air, and the only value that money has is because it's lowering the value of all the other money in a process we think called inflation, is actually theft of your savings and your income. To create new money takes value away from your existing money. Then your county is engaged in the receipt of illegal goods. It is criminal activity. And not only is it subject to statutory law, it's civil law, where there is no ability in terms of the district attorney or the county budget to defend yourself. And let's take on CAFR accounts. I just got this up in Montana. This is an independent auditor's report year ending June 30th, 2011 for Lincoln County, Montana. Population 10 to 15,000 people. And in there they have a statement of net assets, and at the bottom it says $48.6 million. That's what's on the balance sheet. But if you read the footnotes, it says notes to the financial statement, security investment type, $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion are floating around as a slush fund between your property taxes, the state and the federal government. It's floating around there somewhere as your property taxes. In Lincoln County, that worked out to $250,000 for man, woman, and child. You have the same thing going on in your county. 48.6 million reported, 2.4 billion in reality. I think this is great for a grand jury investigation. Again, constitutional counties, to remind you, are there to affirm those counties that decide to actually abide by their oaths and affirm and restore the meaning of the Constitution. You have to elect constitutional sheriffs, and you've got to elect constitutional supervisors, commissioners, district attorneys, county councils, and judges. What we need today in these positions are patriots, not administrators. The These are not ordinary times. We are in the same condition we were a couple 100+ years ago, and we need the John Adamsons and the Thomas Jeffersons to emerge. What you can do. You can support the Defend Rural America effort. For the first time, there was a real opportunity for one consistent program to be supported across a broad front. This program was started in Waimika, California, is now extended to about 20 counties, all the way down to Fresno County. We're starting it simultaneously. We're going to expand in the Fresno area, but we're starting here in Oregon. My recent vacation to Montana turned out to be over 24 presentations and discussions on this. And now I have at least 4 counties that are going to go along with the Defend Rural America program on those western watersheds. And in fact, this month in New York, we have a presentation going on in upper state New York, run by another group using the Defend Rural America concepts. We have the opportunity in our grasp to actually begin to unify and to make a difference. What you can do. Now in the past, all I've asked for is money to basically pay off the venues, and I'm sure there's several $100s that this thing costs. Now I have a reason to ask you for more. I'd like every one of you to consider today kicking in $20, $50, $100 in that bucket as you leave the room, and it will be put to good use. Make sure that we know who you are. If you haven't registered, we need your name and your email address as a minimum, preferably where you live, roughly, city, county is good enough, so that we know how to reach you and so you can stay involved and you can help our effort as we go forward. Study the Defend Rural America website. It is essentially a free encyclopedia. It's not only free to you to read it, there's no subscription required, it's free of advertising, and it's free of Google. I do not use Google Analytics, so nothing is being tracked that I know of. Take the training. I'm going to start some training classes over phone starting in November, run for about 2 months. And I encourage you to attend your future board meetings, board of commissioner meetings, until we get what we need starting now. Show up. Talk to them individually. Sit down with them. Understand where they're coming from. Give them information. You know, have an exchange of dialogues. I have the feeling that many of them are very good people. They're just part of a system that we all didn't understand before. What we need a permanent plan to defend against not only current but future endangered species acts. We need immediate resolutions to start opening up those forests and properly managing those forests to stop the destruction. And we need to address the general plan and make sure that these top-down policies are not being pushed into determining your lands, but that the lands remain under your sovereign jurisdiction. The website is www.defendruralamerica.com. And if you want to reach me, it's Kirk@defendruralamerica.com. Thank you.
And your sheriff to deliver that resolution from the county all the way to Washington. That's what's got to happen. So the people here need to read your community wildfire protection plans, educate yourselves, and then go to your county commissioners. This gentleman right here will support that. Thank you.
Anybody from Jeff or from Josephine County, please contact the commissioners and express that thought to them. I've asked them and I've been ignored. I will stand with the commissioners. All we need is 2 resolutions to get the ball rolling. They've done it elsewhere. I suggest you check on the internet with Apache County, Arizona. They've done it. They're there. And Modoc County, California, we just went through this as well. It is something that can work, but it's up to you to push the commissioners' buttons to make them want to do this. And I'll see it with them.
Tom McKenzie, Southwest Oregon Coordinator for Okie, Oregon, Mr. MacKenzie, Sheriff Gilbertson, Mr. Henry. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for the presentation. First off, I wanted to mention that I'd like to mention that Oregon speakers and Oregon Canada, people against the NDAA, are in fact working diligently against the National Defense Authorization Act, specifically 2012, with the 1021 and 1022 sections affecting American citizens and lawful residents dealing with Americans as being able to be detained indefinitely and rendered to a foreign country held under military rule, etc. No due process whatsoever. And under the Constitution, our constitutional attorneys that we work with, the five, the Patriot Coalition, the Stewart Club, or the constitutional attorney, we've drafted out a resolution that we're taking each individual county. And if there are other county commissioners in this room, I'd ask them to contact me afterwards, gain my card. And the resolution that we have is called Destroying Constitutional Governance Resolution for all the counties. We'll be approaching different counties, Douglas, Klamath, Coolidge, etc. And we're finding that more and more people are going towards us on this because they're realizing what the devastation of our country is going through to the demise of our constitutional liberties. So, in other words, I did the presentation earlier at Kate Junction, and that's something that earlier that I'll say open and state that the real people who are suspected, in my opinion, of violating Section 1021 and 1022 of the NDAA would be. How about that?
Encourage people to come out here.
Number 5.
Thank you, Joe.
One of those aren't working.
I just say, I want to give people a start coming in and comments and questions. I mean, have people come on back to the table, but I don't want to get too far away because I want people to really digest what's being said today and really have discussion on that.
Certainly. This is about controlling our own county governments is what we're approaching with the commission. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Okay, my name is Leila, and I'm actually here from Lane County, where our sheriff is not in the ballpark. I'm here with the Oregon Liberty Coalition. It's a group of like-minded groups, or it's a coalition of like-minded groups attempting to try and get our freedom back. And I came up to ask make a comment, but are you I went to a Trade America 2 years ago in Seattle with Fred Kelly Grant. You're not working with him, or are you?
Let me just say this. Kirk Kelly Grant's kind of working on their coordination. And coordination is one of those approaches to this. Between coordination and jurisdiction, let me just take a moment. Sorry. We have about 4 major themes going on right now. Statehood, which is being pushed by Ken Ivory in the state of Utah, is now working with multiple other states to try and get their. They concede the federal government ownership of the land and we want it back. That's the approach. The second approach is the one that 60 counties formed the new state of Jefferson. Okay? And then the third approach is coordination. All 4 of those I put in column A because they have one thing in common. They all require the federal government to go along. They put us in a subordinate position where we have no ability to go on the offense. The fourth one is jurisdiction, which is column B. And frankly, once you understand jurisdiction, it accomplishes 80% of what you're trying to accomplish with those other 3, and you can do it next week. You don't have to prove this. They already have the constitutional authorities there. It doesn't require the approval of the state legislature. It doesn't require the approval of Congress, the President of the United States, or anybody else. All it does is have the cojones to move forward and do it. And that's really where I stand is on that. I do believe that the other 3, Fred, whatever else, approach those, support it. But I think all of them should basically adopt the jurisdictional approach to the You should, because it's something we can do immediately, no need to stop.
And I agree, because that seminar was way extensive. It was so detailed. The other thing I wanted to say, though, is that I was listening to somebody being interviewed on talk radio within the last 6 months, and it distressed me about the forest lands and the EPA and spotted owl, only in the response that this person gave when he said, and as we all know, if the EPA or some other group that lives off of our tax dollars sues the state or the county, if they lose, they win. And if they win, we won't, it's just, we pay them whether they win or lose because they live off of us. And so what this gentleman was saying is that it was easier to collaborate than it was to fight because we couldn't afford the extra money to take on the case to lose. And I guess what I'm curious about is there any mechanism that you have thought of or found that we can defund these self-cannibalizing groups?
When you move forward on jurisdiction like Apache County has done, they cannot get EJA funds. Suing a county does not give them access to EJA funds, and so what's happened is Josephine County is not being sued.
Is that first?
That's the program. They can't become wealthy off of suing counties.
Thank you.
That goes to, it's outside their jurisdiction because it's at the local level. It's not even dealing with the federal level, it's dealing at the local level. That's why we keep reiterating. All it takes is for the county to come up with 2 resolutions and the ball starts rolling. It's truly that simple.
Thanks.
Before we continue the question and answer, I want to make a few announcements. Could I attention to the back there, please? No, that's okay. Just stay right there. Let's listen to these announcements, and then you can move toward the outside if you don't want to listen to questions and answers. But anyway, we've got to defend against this frog and toad listing, or we're just going to have to abandon all hope. And then we're going to have to work at getting money budget to come from the county budgets to support research to defend against this fraud and toad listing. And so then we're going to have to come. What they're doing is they're coming against the farmers, and it creates a personal loss. Of course, Kirk's already talked about that, but we need immediate rebuttals of the frog and toad listing before the November 1st deadline. And the counties need to exercise their own jurisdiction. The federal state do not own our land or have jurisdiction. Counties are only there to protect their constituents. We need to have the sheriffs break open locks and open roads. Okay, so there's a new concept coming down called the general plan. It takes away the rights of private property owners as if it is the county plan, but it is actually coming down to them from the feds. So you got to fight that also. So we're on board with this program, and here's what we want all of you to do. First, make a significant donation to help us fund more meetings and get more people involved. Second, register if you haven't already. We need to be able to contact you. Then sign up for training in California. There's more information on the Defend Rural America website. It'll be 6 hours of training, 2 hours on Neo-environmentalist groups, 2 hours on understanding legislation, 2 hours on how to write commentary to make scientific arguments against environmental listings. And we could plan more events like this, so who wants to make these events happen? All right, good. So let us know, contact us about that. And then the last thing is, there will be a meeting coming up in 3 weeks on October 12th, right here in town in the Black Forest restaurant in Grants Pass. And so we're going to learn more about jurisdiction, Kirk is going to join us at the meeting by phone. So I'm going to get the flyers about that on my car now while you guys are doing question and answer. I'll be right back. Put them on the registration table so you can pick those up about the meeting in about 3 weeks.
Very good presentation. I really appreciate it.
My name is Monty Proble. I traveled up here from Humboldt, and fantastic. First time I've heard your presentation. It's really good. I came here more as a warning to you guys to let you know what's coming your way. About 7 years ago in Humboldt County, we woke up and they were trying to pass a law saying you couldn't live on your own land, timberland. You couldn't have a residence on your own timberland. And then a bunch of us started getting together, and then they changed it to 600 square acres. So that started us working to see how they were attacking. They were coming through our general plan. In California, every county has to have a general plan, and they're going through the general plan and passing these just terrible, terrible regulations, and it's activated us. And so it's coming your way. And my wife has more to say about this, but another thing about the sheriffs, I'm really proud of the way you're standing up, and people don't realize that the sheriff in the United States is the only elected official, a police official in the United States. And your job is to protect the people in your county. You're the only one that's really, if people have a problem, go to your sheriff. He has powers to help you. Your commissioners don't, even your firefighters don't. You're the one that really can help these people. So I got a lot to say, but I'll let everybody else talk. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Debbie Colt, and I'm the chairman of the Humboldt Coalition for Property Rights. And we were formed about 7 years ago because of this attempt to prevent us from being able to live on timberland. And they really caused a lot of people to start getting organized. And one thing we found out recently is that an environmental group called the Resources Legacy Fund Foundation contributed $325,000 to affect Humboldt County's general plan. It was their starting point. They created the funding to create the Healthy Humboldt Coalition to bring as many environmental restrictions into our general plan as they could. They want everyone living in town. They want no one living out in the hills. And that's what that $325,000 was to do. And we discovered that in one of their own publications in which they were bragging about it. So it is something to really watch out for, is this outside money coming into your county to cause your general plan to be as restrictive as possible in landowners. One question I have for you, if we can get our local access TV to run your DVD, do we have your permission?
You guys can go or
You.
Kirk? Yeah, we have my permission for non-commercial use.
It's non-commercial TV, but they do publicize public meetings, and they do publicize a lot of things, and I think if we can get them to play your DVD on Access TV, it's surprising how many people watch that, because they comment on the comments that I make in public hearings. People I don't even know comment on them, so people do watch it. And one last thing is county councils, at least in Humboldt County, our county council has an agenda, and they're giving legal advice to our supervisors and to all the department heads, the planning department, and their legal advice comes from their agenda rather than the law. And that's another thing to watch out for.
Two things. When the by the county commissioners, it eliminates the green Nazis from suing. The Equal Justice Act, or Access to the Equal Justice Act, can only be filed in federal courts. So when the county commissioners step forward and do this kind of a resolution and write the ordinance, it eliminates them from suing, because they're going to have to take money out of their pockets to sue, and they're not about to do that. And the second thing is the Oregon spotted frog. The counties have until October 28th to write their answer and get it submitted. Otherwise, they don't have standing. That's critical. Time is running out.
How many counties are affected by that?
14 counties. Jackson County, Klamath County, DeSoto County, and I don't know the rest, but there's 14 counties that are going to be affected. Thanks.
Ms. MacKenzie, I want to thank you again so much for this explosive information you gave us today. And I feel like I learned so much more about using the word Neo-environmentalism. So I'm going out with a new mindset to express my feeling again and again, as we do a number of us here at the county commissioners meeting. One thing as a citizen, I want to give you encouragement as far as a citizen, because we're talking about the Constitution and how empowered we can be. And one thing is just by educating and making people recognize that this is an important week. And this is an important week. This is National U.S. Constitution Week. Thank you to Ronald Reagan back in 1981, who said it was so important because we were losing the power of what the Constitution meant. And he kind of just made it become more aware as citizens and what our responsibilities were. And on that same note is that my friend here who was in the audience, we did the language, took Ronald Reagan, put the stats up, and did the proclamation for our county commissioners just recently, and they did a proclamation which was awesome. But what I tried to do to make sure we could get it passed and they would be willing is that I made it comparable to what they were doing. They do a lot of proclamations all the time, and I said that if we can do a proclamation, 4 weeks proclamation on Worldwide Breastfeeding Week, it would be nice if we could do something on our U.S. Constitution Week, so just to kind of balance it up and move up the Constitution. So anyway, thank you so much, and it was really mind-boggling tonight to listen to such valuable information. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda. I live here in Josephine County. Just like everybody else in this room, I appreciate you being here. I heard you yesterday on Bill Meyer's program. I listen to it every morning. I believe it helps you understand what's going on in all our 4 or 5 counties that all connect with each other. I wish you would have come last week so that there would have been more notification that you were going to be here. So I'll help on that part, getting the word out. It's just, sometimes getting the word out is the most important thing. I know everyone in here, I'm hearing that they would have liked to have known earlier, so they could have told more people. So let's work on that as a group here in the county. We do a great job of communicating. I want to also mention that 1440, for some reason I moved here from Southern California 4 years ago, and I got connected with Bill Meyer's program on 1440 AM, and the first thing I learned was about the dam removal. This was 4 years ago, so I've been avidly involved in Southern Oregon, like what the heck is people doing? So I invite you to listen at 8 o'clock on Sunday night. This guy, his name is Dr. Bill Wattenberg, is that his name? He's out of San Francisco.
Wattenberg?
Yeah, I mean, he has gone up against the Department of Interior for a very long time, and he's been very successful. So he just kind of gives you the believability. We're all using words, and what we need to do is get our adjectives, our descriptor words to be the same, and not start, we don't need to defend, we just need to be talking. I mean, my grandchildren, yeah. Anyway, I just appreciate that. Just everybody needs to communicate.
Thank you, gentlemen, for putting on a great program again. I moved here from Utah about 10 years ago. made the mistake of buying some property, thinking I could do something with it. I'm a recovering attorney myself. Trying to acclimate myself to the fact that back in the 1950s and 60s, when I was seeing what was going on in this country, I never thought I'd live long enough to see us get to where we've got. But in any event, I think one thing that's really dangerous is that in Oregon, taking property from private ownership, back in 2007, when we were fighting for the Measure 37 people, and we had actually a victory in Judge Painter's federal court, and the county double-crossed us because we were told if we went and started a lawsuit, all they wanted to do was get a determination from the court as to how they should handle these claims. Well, we won, and Judge Painter gave them a clear path of how they could honor these claims. But the state came after them and threatened them, told them they would sue them personally if they dared let us win. So they appealed the case in the Ninth Circuit. Take this out. But here's the problem. Judges have absolute immunity, and that's what we've got to fight. We need a law in this state that says that judges can be sued. They don't have to be sued for money. But the federal government, when they passed the 1996 Amendment 42 U.S. Code 1983, basically ratcheted it down where you can't sue them even to get relief from declaratory and injunctive relief. So we need to press for a state law that allows us to sue the judges, because in this state, they're developing a system where if you can't take the property away from the citizens through the executive branch or the legislative act, they're just going to create a way for the judges to take it away from them. You can't sue them to get it back. In fact, I'm helping a law firm.
Let me try to speed it up a little bit. So basically your message is you'd like to get on board with the idea that suing judges can be holding them accountable.
Well, we can't sue them unless we pass a law that allows you to sue them. That's what we got to do.
Let me make it a challenge to you, because what I find is that some of the best people that can help restore this country are the retired judges, the retired foresters, the people that are on the line still employed and do not speak up. But I would encourage you to take these constitutional arguments that we're laying out here and study them yourself, and then become help be a person to help this movement, this area, actually find a legal basis and go through it. We've had attorneys that have done this in other counties that have taken this material that we've given them, and they go ahead and study it and find out that what we're saying is actually true and supported. That really helps, and I would encourage you to do something like that.
Well, I volunteered. I signed a sheet there, and I will do that. And I'd also encourage people to sign up for the Hillsdale courses that are free. And I mean, that's a good way to get people to learn. There's one going on economics now, and we've had one going on the Constitution for a long time. So we've got to encourage. You look around these rooms, and the same thing we had with our group, with the Measure 37 people. Most of them, we're all in our last decade of life, probably. We've got to get to young people and rescue them from this terrible education that they're getting.
Okay, thank you. Questions. I mean, this tends to happen a lot of these meetings. We have a focus strategy. We're saying, look, here's a plan. And this plan addresses really fundamental issues. And then we have all these people pointing up and saying good things, but pointing in all different directions. And, so much white noise. What I encourage you to do is to start thinking differently. We've laid out a program. This program has a chance now that is going to expand across immediately 4 states. And I would suggest that you get on board this plan, and if you have questions about the plan, take an opportunity tonight to ask that question. Or if you want to support this plan, identify yourselves, John, or others, come to the follow-up meeting. That's really what the primary thing I would like to see come out of this meeting.